What's going on, everyone, and welcome into Plaisant's podcast, filled to the brim with glitchy analysis and freezing cold takes, so cold that they're boiling hot. In this episode, we are going to be previewing the football season for the Florida Gators. Let's talk about the stars on this team. On the offensive side of the ball, you've got Graham Mertz, the quarterback. He transferred in from Wisconsin last season, had a rough start to the year, but finished off pretty strong. I got to see him in the Florida LSU game, and I thought he played pretty well. The thing about this guy is he is not a quarterback who is going to win you the football game, but he's also a quarterback who is not going to lose you the football game. He is the ultimate college football game managing quarterback. Could he be top 25 this year? Absolutely, but I have a couple of reservations as to why not, but we'll get into that later in the video. The rest of this offense, we have Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon, the right tackle that has transferred in from San Diego State. This is going to be a huge part of shoring up this Florida offensive line. They're going to need all the time in the world to throw the ball this year, and he is definitely a major contributing factor. And last but not least, we have Montrell Johnson Jr., a running back who is going to be taking over the majority of the workload for the Gators this year. I think this is a 1,000-yard back. We're going to have to wait and see just how many carries per game he gets, but in my opinion, it's got to be upwards of at least 15. On the defensive side of the ball, we've got Joey Slackman. Now, there are not a ton of stars on this Florida defense, but Joey Slackman is one of the best run stoppers in college football, and the pass rush is not out of his wheelhouse. I think if you see Florida defense making a play, Joey Slackman's going to be right there somewhere in the pile. Now, let's talk about a couple of major storylines going into this year. First up, I think it is really important to talk about how this Florida football team is pretty dang good. I would put them in the top 25 roster-wise. They have tons of talent. No, like, superstars, but every single position group is pretty well-rounded. And I think given another year, this team could be competing for a 9-3 or 10-2 season. But the problem is they play the toughest schedule in all of college football, and it's not even close in my opinion. The second storyline kind of relates to that. Billy Napier is on the hot seat. I said the other day when I was talking about Arkansas and Sam Pittman, if I don't know what a hot seat is, then you should probably go ahead and take away my phone and my microphone. This is a hot seat, ladies and gentlemen. Billy Napier is on the verge of losing his job in the first 6 weeks if everything goes wrong. And to be honest, I could see why. Going 11-14 in your first couple of years is just not going to cut it in a place like Florida, a place that demands championship contention year in and year out. Having yet another losing season is not going to cut it with this fan base at all. So Billy Napier has to win early. Later in the year, it's going to be tougher, and I think some Gator fans will be understanding, but I think 6 wins is the minimum. Anything less than that, Gator fans are calling for his job immediately. Now, let's talk about the key losses and key additions to this team from last year to this year. From the losses, Ricky Pearsall, your leading receiver in both receptions and yards, gets drafted in the first round. This is a guy that was the playmaker on the offense, and losing him is going to be a massive void of talent, of pressure, you name it. This offensive's got to make up for that in some way, shape, or form. And then to put on top of that, to add injury, we've got Trevor Etienne transferring from Florida to Georgia, the #1 rival of these Gators. Absolutely, I wouldn't want to say disrespectful, but you could definitely classify it as such. This was the leading rusher last year for the Gators, and quite frankly, one of the bright spots for this year's team, or at least he was supposed to be. So the Florida offense has got some major holes to fill. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you lose a couple of pass rushers in the transfer portal, which I think is important. You have to get to the quarterback if you want to win football games. But more notably, Scooby Williams, a linebacker that started quite a few games for the Gators, he also transferred out, and I think that's extremely foretelling to how this season is going to go and to what Florida players think of Billy Napier and the future here at Florida. Now, key additions. Like I said, Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon transfers in from San Diego State. I think he's a top 15 tackle. Elijah Badger from Arizona State, wide receiver, kind of follows in that Jaden Daniels kind of move from the Pac-12, well, now the Big 12 to the SEC. We could see him make some plays, but I don't necessarily know how involved he's going to be, especially early on in the offense. But on the defensive side of the football, Cormani McClain, a former 5-star that committed and played at Colorado last year, had some problems, I think, going back and forth with Deion Sanders. But now he's here at Florida. Will he be in the starting lineup? I'm not sure. He seems more like a project guy now than he did last year. But if he gets on the field, I think he could definitely be a playmaker. Now, last but not least, before we get into the record prediction here, let's talk about the hinge game for this Florida team. It's game 1 versus Miami. Cam Ward, who transfers in from Washington State, goes to Miami, and they are coming in to the Swamp game 1. This is one of the biggest games that I can remember to start Florida's season in years. More important than the Utah games, like this is about the future of the program. And if Florida can win this, I could definitely see them winning at least 6 games and keeping Billy Napier. But if they lose, the wheels are off and God only knows what's going to happen. So now let's get into the record prediction. And to start with Miami, I have Florida dropping this game. I think that Cam Ward is a top 10 quarterback in the league. We could definitely hear him in Heisman talk. The Miami offensive line is much improved. I really like their receiving core, and their defense is top 15 in the entire college football atmosphere. The Swamp is a hard place to play. I just don't know how much juice is in this fan base this year. The outlook is very grim just because of the latter half of this schedule. But let's move on. Talk about Samford. FCS opponent. That's a W. It's an SEC team. They're never going to lose to a Samford. Now, versus Texas A&M at home, I think yet this is another drop game for the Gators. Texas A&M is stacked with talent. I think they have a better roster than Florida, and it's going to be hard to have this Gators team motivated when your coach is being talked about being fired, when your fan base is not really behind you that much. So A&M at home is a loss. At Mississippi State, they have one of the worst rosters, not only in the SEC, but quite possibly college football. I give Florida the W here, and then they come back home and get a really good re-up win at home. First one of the year that matters versus UCF. They're, what, 3-2 now? The season kind of looks like it could be saved, but then they go to at Tennessee. That's a really tough place to play, and I think Tennessee's roster is pretty much on par with Florida's, and I've got to give the Vols the home field advantage, so that's a loss for the Gators. But then coming back home, you guys have owned Kentucky every single year, except for maybe the last couple of seasons, but I think that the old guard gets its day. Beating Kentucky, that is an important win, but the last, I think, 5 games, at home versus Georgia, at Texas, at home for LSU, versus Ole Miss, and then at Florida State, every single one of those, you're outgunned on offense. There's more defensive talent on all of those teams, and quite frankly, I said this to begin with, Graham Mertz is not a guy who is going to win football games for you. But Jackson Dart, Quinn Ewers, Connor Wegman, I think that those guys are quarterbacks who can win football games. That's the deciding factor for me. So overall, a 4-8 season for Florida. I think after maybe the Texas loss or the Ole Miss loss, it's going to become very evident that Billy Napier is going to be out. The recruiting class is going to be really important to salvage for next season. You've got a 5-star quarterback in DJ Lagway in the waiting. All of this hinges on the Miami game, though. I definitely think if the Florida Gators can win that, they'll go 6-6 to get to a bowl and re-up for next year with an easier schedule. College football playoff contention is definitely in the discussion, but right now is 4-8. That's the best I've got for you. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in. Stay tuned. We're going to be talking about Georgia next, and we'll see you in the next episode.